we're on course for the longest recession since the 1920s. You looking forward to that? And that's before we get to all the other stuff like the migrants and the Manchester Arena bombing and Imran Khan getting shot. We live in what the old Chinese curse calls interesting times. Absent a course correction that neither of the two dismal choices in America's hideous, corrupt electoral system seems minded to make. It's interesting, isn't it, that the nation which gave the Western world non-binary gender identities has the most boringly binary political choice in the developed world. But anyway, absent a course correction that its decadent leadership seems most unlikely to make, America's post-1950 imperium is over. It's broke. It's broken than anybody has ever been in the history of brokenness. The federal government officially has to pay back $30 trillion just to get back to having nothing. Nada, zero, zilch in its pocket. The American language has lots of words for nothing. No one else has ever paid back $30 trillion in the history of mankind. And no one in Washington gives you the least impression they're going to be the first to do it. So a transfer of global power is underway. Nobody in our generally useless media much talks about it, but interestingly, they assume it. Earlier today, I was checking in with the BBC. That was my first mistake. And this is their headline over there. Look at this thing. Can the US live in Xi Jinping's world? So it's Chairman Xi's world. We just live in it and pay for it. This has implications not just for America, but for a second-ranked power too. The transfer of global leadership from the British Empire to the American Republic, from the old lion to her prodigal son, was the smoothest in history, to the point where it will be treated by historians as a single era, as the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire are. I made that point in an excellent bestseller I wrote over a decade ago, After America. Well worth your time, still available in paperback. All you have to do is add a couple more zeros to the numbers I cite in there. The transfer of world dominance from America to China is not likely to go half so smoothly this time, as we can already see all over the map, from Ukraine to the Solomon Islands. Well, you're probably saying, what's all that got to do with me? I'm getting on a bit. I'm 93, I'm 57, 42, 28 and a half. I'll be dead from sudden death syndrome before I have the chance to learn Mandarin. Maybe. Maybe, if you're lucky. But there's a deal of pain they can inflict on you before you go. The Bank of England, as we heard from Polly, just put up interest rates to 3%. So that's millions of people in the UK who are going to have to find more money every month just to pay off their monthly home payment. That 3%, by the way, bears no actual relation to the rate of inflation or anything else. The Office for National Statistics just reported that basic grocery items, such as tea bags and pasta shells, have now gone up 17%. So that's 6 times the Bank of England's new interest rate. But the bank is trying to get you slowly, unobtrusively, non-violent, revolutionarily adjusted to the idea that money is no longer free, that borrowing money will now cost you money. We've had no such thing as an interest rate since the early years of this century. In fact, just 3 years ago, European banks would pay you to borrow their money. Headline from the Washington Post. Banks are paying people to borrow money. That's alarming news for the global economy. That's not a joke. If you wanted to borrow, say, 200,000 euros from the Jyske Bank in Denmark, you only had to pay back 199,000 euros. You could borrow a big chunk of money and you had to pay back less. And as I said, that was just 3 years ago. Washington Post, August 14th, 2019. Whether or not it was, quote, alarming news for the global economy, we never got to find out, because at pretty much that exact moment, the more ambitious chappies at the Wuhan Institute of Virology were fine-tuning the big one for global release a few weeks later. The virus itself was not that lethal. In the UK, the median age of death from the COVID has always been above UK life expectancy. Right now it's about 86 versus life expectancy of about 80. It sounds heartless to put it like that, but it's not as heartless as ignoring the tens of thousands of excess deaths we now have and have had since the beginning of this year, mainly among the young and middle-aged, or indeed the thousands of excess deaths of children that the European statistical agencies keep reporting into the black hole of media silence. Be that as it may, the world caught a Chinese virus with very strange side effects. We caught a Chinese virus that apparently infected us with Chinese-style freedom of speech, Chinese-style freedom of movement, Chinese-style freedom of religion. We now think it perfectly normal for bank clerks to demand to know why you're withdrawing £200. We think it perfectly normal for the cities of Oxford and Canterbury to forbid you from driving your car out of your designated zone and into an adjacent zone. For a while it was perfectly respectable to demand you undergo a medical procedure in order to board a plane or visit a restaurant. Andrew Neil, my distinguished predecessor in this very chair, is he still on his summer sabbatical? I thought he'd be back by now. He's still on his summer sabbatical. Oh, he's taking his time. My predecessor, Andrew Neil, tweeted out less than a year ago, quote, "Time to punish Britain's 5 million vaccine refuseniks." Don't you love Andrew Neil when he's being totally butch? See that final line right at the bottom of your screen there? Oh, what's that? This tweet has been deleted. Big butchy boy Andrew did that just in the last few days. Presumably, he's a little bit sheepish now, a little bit embarrassed at the way he surrendered so easily to the propaganda. But I'll tell you something, I bet he'll do it again next time over whatever the next thing is, won't he? Because just that's the easy call to make, to go along with it. And even more disturbing, this month's indispensable man in the Chancellor of power thinks we're not Chinese enough.
I very much agree with the central point in Gabriel's paper that we should be aiming for zero infection and elimination of the disease, because that is basically the approach taken in countries which have a SARS strategy as opposed to a flu strategy. And those are the countries that have overwhelmingly been the most successful in tackling coronavirus. You know, my sister lives in Beijing, and she flew back to Beijing in the middle of lockdown. And just to give you an idea of the contrast, she was escorted from the airport in Beijing to her home by Ministry of Health officials, and then put into her home for 2 weeks quarantine. The door was sealed.
Oh, the door was sealed. Oh, what a pity we're not doing that to our sisters, because that way we'll get to... That's a madman talking. But he's a madman who happens to be Chancellor of the Exchequer. So just like the subjects of Mad King Ludwig of Bavaria, you guys have to suck it up and live with it. Here's Jeremy Hunt today.
Today's news is going to be very tough for families with mortgages up and down the country, for businesses with loans. But there is a global economic crisis. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, say a third of the world's economy is now in recession. And the best thing the government can do if we want to bring down these rises in interest rates is to show that we're bringing down our debt. Families up and down the country have to balance their accounts at home, and we must do the same as a government.
Yeah, good luck with that. Good luck with that when you're importing 1,000 Albanians every night. The cost of living is the cost of lockdown. Rishi Sunak blew through £500 billion that this country does not have in pursuit of Jeremy Hunt's delusion, and we're told by the markets and the media that the sensible, prudent choice to save us from the damage done by Rishi Sunak is more Rishi Sunak. Get used to today's interest rate hike. There'll be another along any moment. Let me know what you think. GBViews at gbnews.uk.